The morning was quiet, and the sun rose slow like it was afraid to touch the earth. She stood by the window holding a cup that had long gone cold, her fingers tracing the rim as if memory could be felt through porcelain. The walls still carried the echo of laughter that no longer lived there. She could almost hear his voice calling her name from the hallway, the way he used to drag his backpack across the floor and complain about the early mornings. She smiled for a moment, a fragile flicker of warmth in the coldness that had settled in her chest. It was a day like this when everything changed. A morning too ordinary to know it would break the world. She remembered his breakfast, the way he spilled milk on the table and said sorry with that crooked grin that always made her heart soften. She told him to hurry, that he would miss the bus, and he said, "Mom, it's just school. Nothing will happen if I am late." She wanted to believe that the world was still kind, that a day could still begin and end the way it should. She wanted to believe that the sun would rise and the moon would follow, without taking anything precious in between. The clock ticked and the moment passed, like all moments do. And yet this one stayed somewhere heavy inside. Her chest, he ran out the door shouting, "Love you," over his shoulder, and she shouted back, "Love you too, baby." Those were the last words that left her mouth before silence became the language of her days, before sirens replaced the sound of laughter, before grief became her shadow. She remembered the phone ringing, a voice trembling on the other end. Something about an emergency, something about the school. Her heart began to race, but her mind refused to understand. She drove fast, faster than she ever had her hands shaking on the wheel, the world outside blurring into streaks of color. She prayed without words, because words were too small for the fear that filled her. She saw flashing lights, saw parents screaming, saw officers holding them. Back, she called his name over and over as if sound alone could bring him back to her, time fractured that day. It no longer moved forward. It just circled the same unbearable moment again and again. She sat on the cold floor of that gymnasium, surrounded by other faces twisted in horror and disbelief. They said names one by one, her ears ringing with every syllable that was not his. Until the moment it was, she felt the air leave her lungs like the world had stolen her breath. She tried to stand, but her knees gave way. Someone tried to hold her, but she felt nothing. No hands, no ground, no sound, just a hollow space where her soul used to live. The days that followed were a blur of flowers, prayers, and cameras. People spoke of heroes and tragedy, of change and justice, but all she heard was silence. Her home became a museum of his things, untouched, unbreathed, a shirt on the chair, a half-drawn picture on his desk, the smell of his shampoo lingering in the hallway she couldn't bear to wash, a way she would sit on his bed at night and whisper his name as if the air could carry it somewhere he could hear. She told him stories of the world outside that kept moving, of people who forgot how to stop and grieve. She told him she was sorry for every time she rushed him, for every time she said not now, for every time she didn't know. The last would be the last. One night she found herself standing at his door again, her fingers tracing the frame. She whispered, "I will never forget you." And she meant it in the marrow of her bones. She meant it with every beat of her breaking heart. She walked to the porch and looked up at the stars. They seemed cruel in their brightness. She wondered if he could see her, if he could hear the way. Her heart still called his name across the distance. She closed her eyes and let the tears fall, not as weakness, but as proof that love could outlive anything, even death. And somewhere in that quiet, she realized that the pain was not something to escape, but something to carry. That grief was not the end of love, but the shape it takes when the body is gone. She knew the world would never be the same, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn to live in its ruins, to find fragments of light in the shadow he left behind. The morning after the funeral, the world still dared to turn, as if it had not broken with her. She sat by the kitchen window, where the light spilled in soft and golden, but it no longer felt warm. She had learned that the sun could shine even when nothing inside her could. She watched the street where the bus once stopped, the same corner where he had waved to her one last time, and she thought how cruel it was that buses still came and went, while her child never would. She wanted to scream at the sky to make it stop, But her voice was buried beneath the weight of everything unsaid. The house was full of flowers, but they smelled like goodbye. She tried to thank the people who came, but her words fell apart halfway. Out of her mouth, they hugged her with trembling arms, whispered, "We are praying for you." But no prayer could touch the emptiness that had taken root inside her days past, and she counted them not in numbers, but in memories the first day she managed to stand without collapsing the second, when she opened the window and let the air in the third, when she touched his backpack and didn't break completely. She kept a candle burning by his picture, the flame small and steady, like the love that refused to die. One evening, she found a letter from him folded between the pages of an old notebook. It was nothing special, just a list of dreams. "I want to be a teacher. I want to travel. I want to make you proud." She read it over and over until the paper felt like part of her skin, and she whispered, "You already did. My love, you already did." The community began to rebuild in ways that seemed both beautiful and unbearable. Murals on school walls, vigils in the park, voices demanding change. But for her, it was not about politics or headlines. It was about one empty chair, one missing laugh, one heart that would never grow old. She went to the memorial they built near the school. The air was thick with the sound of names carved into stone. She traced the letters of his name with trembling fingers, feeling the cold surface against her skin. She wanted to lift the stone and bring him home. She wanted to trade her breath for his, but all she could do was stand there and let the tears fall. Like rain, a woman beside her whispered that she too had lost her son, and for the first time she did not feel completely alone. They stood together in silence, two mothers bound by grief and love that the world could not understand. They didn't need words, because sorrow spoke for them. Later, they met for coffee. They shared stories of birthdays that would never come, of laughter that still haunted their dreams. And in those shared moments of pain, there was also something like healing, a fragile thread of understanding that maybe they could help each other carry the weight. She started visiting the school again when no one was there. She would walk the empty halls, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the walls. She would stand by the classroom door and imagine him raising his hand, answering a question, his smile bright as sunlight. She left a single white rose on his desk each time and whispered, "I'm still here. I will always be here." One evening, she sat on the porch watching. The sky turned violet, and she felt a small shift inside her. Not peace, not yet, but something close to breathing again. She realized that grief was not something to finish. It was something to live with gently, to hold like a fragile glass heart. She began writing letters to him every night, words flowing like water from a river that would never run dry. She told him about the seasons, the wind, the strangers who had become friends. She told him that she was learning how to live in the silence, and that sometimes in the stillness, she could almost feel him near, like a whisper in her ear, saying, "It's okay, Mom, you can keep going." And she did not know if that voice was real or memory, but she held on to it like faith. She began volunteering at the community center, helping other parents who had lost someone. She listened to their stories, held their hands, shared her own, and in giving comfort, she found fragments of her own healing. She learned that pain shared is pain softened, and that love can become a bridge between the living and the gone. One night before she went to sleep, she opened the window and looked at the stars again. They no longer felt cruel. They looked like promises, tiny lights refusing to fade. She whispered, "I miss you, my heart, but I am learning to live with the missing. I am learning to love even when it hurts." And as the night wind moved through the trees, she felt something gentle brush her cheek a touch, like memory, like forgiveness, like love that would never. The years began to move again, slowly, quietly, as if afraid to disturb her. She had learned to live inside the ache like a song that never ends. She woke each morning, not because she wanted to, but because he would have wanted her to. She still kept his photo by the window, the frame worn smooth from the touch of her fingers. She whispered good morning to it every day, and sometimes when the wind passed through the curtains, she could almost feel him answer. She started going to the park, where he used to play, sitting on the same bench watching other children run and laugh. She used to turn away because it hurt too much. But one afternoon she stayed. She watched a little boy fall and scrape his knee. And she found herself walking. Over kneeling down, cleaning the wound with gentle hands, the boy smiled through his tears, and she saw her son in his eyes. It was then she understood that love could still find ways to reach through the dark. She began visiting schools, speaking softly to rooms full of strangers, sharing her story, not with anger, but with the fragile strength that comes from surviving. She spoke of loss of silence, of the need to listen to one another. She said, "No mother should have to bury her child, and no child should have to fear a classroom." The words trembled at first, but soon they became wings carrying her pain into purpose. The people would cry and stand and hold her hands after, and she felt something new grow inside her, a reason to keep breathing. She started a small foundation in his name, a place where parents and teachers and children could come together to learn to heal, to change. She filled it with books and laughter and painted the walls with his favorite color, blue. She said this is what love looks like when it refuses to die. In quiet moments, she still missed him with every heartbeat. She would open his closet sometimes and press his shirt to her face, breathing in the fading scent of innocence. She would light the candle by his picture and sit beside it until dawn, thinking of all the things he might have become, but she no longer felt only pain. She felt gratitude, too. Gratitude that she had known him, even for a short while, that she had held him, heard his laugh, seen the world through his wonder. She realized that memory was not a chain, but a thread that connected them still. One evening she was invited to speak at a national event. Her palms were sweating as she stood before the lights, the crowd, a sea of faces. She began to tell her story, but this time she did not cry. She spoke with calm, steady grace, her voice soft but strong. She told them that healing is not forgetting. It is learning to live with the remembering. She said that love is the one thing bullets cannot destroy, that even in the ruins of tragedy there can grow something beautiful, something brave. When she finished, the room was silent, then filled with the sound of hands clapping. Not for her, but for all the lives still being carried forward in love. That night, when she returned home, she sat on the porch beneath the stars. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, my boy, for teaching me how to love beyond fear, how to rise from the ashes, how to find light in the broken places." She felt the air grow warm around her, a hush, a stillness, a sense that he was near, and she smiled for the first time, without tears. It was a quiet smile, small but true. She realized that this was not the end. It was the continuation of love itself. Time would keep moving, as it always does, but she was no longer afraid of its passing. She had built something lasting, not from stone, but from memory, from compassion, from the invisible strength of a mother's heart. She knew there would always be moments when grief would return like an old familiar visitor. But now she would welcome it, sit with it, and say, "I remember, I am still here. I am still loving." She would carry his name not as a wound, but as a light. And when the morning came soft and gold, she stood once more by the window, the same one where her story began. She looked at the horizon, where the sun was rising again, and whispered, "I am okay." She placed her hand on the glass and imagined his hand on the other side, the world outside still turning, still alive. And she breathed deep, feeling the weight and the wonder of it all, knowing that her love, her loss, her strength had years passed, and the seasons changed. The trees outside her window grew, taller, their branches reaching for the same sky she used to curse. Now she watched them sway with the wind and felt something like peace. The foundation had grown beyond what she imagined. Children laughed in the halls. Teachers came to learn, parents came to grieve and heal. The walls were covered in drawings, bright colors, hope rising from sadness. She often walked those halls, her footsteps soft, her heart Steady, she would stop sometimes before a mural of her son painted by one of the students, his smile wide, his eyes full of light. She would touch the edge of the wall and whisper, "You are still here, my love, in every color, every sound, every heartbeat of this place." She had found her purpose not in escaping the pain, but in transforming it. She became a listener, a quiet presence for others who had walked through the same fire. She sat with mothers who had lost their children. She held their hands while they cried. She told them it is okay to break, that healing is not a straight line, but a spiral that always brings you back to the love at the center. She spoke gently about forgiveness, not as surrender, but as freedom. She said that holding on to anger is like holding your breath forever. Sooner or later, you must exhale. People began to know her not as the woman who lost her son, but as the woman who helped others find life again. And that title felt like a kind of resurrection. She did not see herself as strong. She saw herself as human, raw, and still learning how to breathe. Each day she planted trees in his memory, along the school grounds, small saplings that grew taller each year, their roots deep and sure. She would tell the children that these trees are proof that life continues even after storms, even after everything. Fall's apartone afternoon. She sat beneath one of those trees watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. The air smelled of grass and possibility. She closed her eyes and listened to the laughter of the children playing in the distance, and for the first time in so long, she did not feel the sharp ache of loss. She felt warmth. She felt presence. She whispered softly into the breeze, "Thank you for staying with me in ways I cannot see. Thank you for giving me strength when I thought I had none. Thank you for teaching me that love never dies. It only changes shape." That night, she returned home and opened the box that held his things. The medals, the photos, the little drawings he once made. She spread them out on the table, and instead of crying, she smiled. She remembered how he used to dance in the kitchen, how he would make her laugh until her sides hurt. She began to hum one of his favorite songs, and the house seemed to breathe again, alive with memory. She lit a candle and let its flame reflect in her eyes. She said, "I carried you through the darkest nights, and you carried me back into the light in the years that followed." She continued her work. Her story became a beacon for others, not because of what she lost, but because of how she chose to love. She learned that healing was not about erasing the past, but about weaving it into something sacred. She still missed him every day, but the missing had softened. It had become a quiet companion, rather than a wound she carried. It with grace, she carried it with purpose. On the anniversary of the tragedy, she stood before a crowd gathered at the foundation, children, parents, teachers, and survivors. The air was filled with candlelight and silence. She looked at their faces and spoke softly about hope. She said love is the only thing stronger than fear, stronger than hate, stronger than death. She said when we choose to love, we choose to live again. The crowd held their candles high, and for a moment it looked as if the stars themselves had descended to earth. She lifted her candle too and whispered for him. For all of them, for love later that night when the lights were gone and the world had quieted, she sat by her window again. The moon, silver and gentle, she placed her hand on the glass and breathed in the stillness. She no longer asked for signs or answers. She no longer needed them. She had found him everywhere, in laughter, in kindness, in the beating of her own heart. She whispered, "I kept my promise, my sweet. Boy, I kept your light alive." And as she closed her eyes, she felt a calm warmth. Like arms wrapping around her, the softest echo of a voice saying, "I know, Mom, you did good." And in that moment, there was no distance between them, only love stretching across. Time unbroken, endless, eternal. The years moved like soft waves, gentle and endless, and she had learned to float upon them. She no longer fought the current. She let it carry her where it wished her hair had grown silver. Her hands lined with time, but her heart still beat with quiet strength. Every morning she rose before the sun and walked to the hill behind the foundation, the same hill where she had planted a garden in his memory. It was filled now with wildflowers of every color, their petals Dancing in the wind, she would sit there in the hush of dawn and watch the world awaken the birds. Returning the sky shifting from darkness to gold, she would close her eyes and feel the earth breathing beneath her, and she would whisper, "Thank you." For another day to remember to love to live, the foundation had grown beyond her dreams. It had become a movement not of anger, but of compassion. Schools across the country had joined in creating spaces of peace, of understanding. She traveled sometimes to speak not as a voice of sorrow, but as a testament to resilience. She would stand before young faces and tell them that they are the light this world needs, that kindness is a form of courage, that every act of love ripples farther than they can. See, when she spoke, her voice carried the calm weight of truth, and when she smiled, it reached the eyes of those who still lived in the shadow of their own losses. Night, she would sit by the garden's edge and look up at the stars she had learned. All their names, now she would talk to them as if they were her companions. She would tell them about the people she met, about the laughter she heard again, about how life still surprised her with small mercies. She would tell them that her heart had become softer, not harder, that grief had taught her how to feel everything more deeply. The pain, the beauty, the silence she had come to understand, that nothing is ever truly lost. It only changes form, moving from hand to wind, from laughter to memory, from breath to love. Sometimes she dreamed of him still a little older now than he ever was in life. His smile calm, his eyes bright. He never spoke in these dreams. He only stood beside her, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes just looking at her as if to say, "You did. It, Mom, you found your way." She would wake from those dreams with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were the gentle kind, the kind that fall when the heart is full. As the years continued, she began to write her story down, not to relive the pain, but to leave behind a map for those who would come after. She wrote about the emptiness, about the long nights, about the slow return of hope. She wrote about how she learned to forgive the world, not because it deserved it, but because she deserved peace. She wrote about the way love persisted through everything, how it found her again and again in the smallest gestures and the kindest words. She filled page after page until her story became not one of tragedy, but of transformation. The anniversary of his birth, she gathered everyone at the garden, children, families, teachers, survivors. They released lanterns into the sky, each carrying a message of hope. The air shimmered with light, and she stood watching them rise higher and higher until they became stars among stars. She whispered his name into the night and smiled. She could feel him everywhere, in the laughter around her, in the warmth of the candles, in the rhythm of her breath. She said quietly, "My love, you have become the sky itself." When she finally returned home that night, she sat once more by the window, her reflection softened by the moonlight. She looked out at the quiet world, her world, and for the first time she felt complete, not because nothing was missing, but because she had learned to live with what was. She placed her hand over her heart and said, "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going, for showing me that love is forever." And as she closed her eyes, the wind moved gently through the open window, carrying the scent of wildflowers and something else, something that felt like a whisper, like a promise, like the soft voice of her son saying, "I love you, Mom, always." And she smiled, knowing that this was not the end. This was home. The morning was quiet again, like it was in the beginning, but it no longer carried the same weight of sorrow. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, the air cool and soft, her eyes tracing the horizon where the first light began to bloom. She had grown older, her hair a crown of silver, her hands gentle from years of holding the world. Carefully, she had lived through storms and silence and stillness, and she had learned that every breath was a small miracle. She had stopped counting the years because love had no measure. It simply remained constant, steady, unbroken. She looked out at the path that led to the garden, the flowers swaying like memories, whispering their colors into the dawn. She could see children walking toward the foundation, carrying books, laughter, and dreams, their footsteps full of promise. She smiled, knowing that his spirit lived through them, through every lesson of kindness, every act of courage, every small moment of hope. She had once feared that time would erase him, but now she understood that time had only made him infinite. She walked slowly through the garden, her fingers brushing the petals, each one soft like a heartbeat. She paused before the small stone engraved with his name. She knelt and whispered, "Good morning, my love," the same words she had said every day since he left, and in that quiet she could feel the same warmth that had carried her through all the years. She said, "Today is beautiful, isn't it?" And for a moment the wind answered, moving gently through, the trees wrapping around her like a hug. She closed her eyes and let the feeling settle deep within her. She whispered, "I am not alone, not anymore, not ever," as she stood. She felt no heaviness, only peace, the kind that comes when the soul has finished its circle. She walked back toward the house, the light spilling across the wooden floor. The same place where once she had fallen to her knees in grief, now filled with the calm rhythm of life she made. T sat by the window and opened her journal. She wrote not of loss, but of love. She wrote that grief had once been her cage, but love had become her wings. She wrote that forgiveness was not forgetting, but remembering without pain. She wrote that even in darkness, there is always a seed of light, waiting to bloom. The afternoon sun touched everything golden, the trees, the house, her hands resting on her lap. She looked at the photo of him on the table, the edges worn from years of touch, and smiled. She said, "I did my best. I hope that was enough." And deep within her, she heard the answer soft and clear. "You did more than enough, Mom. You turned pain into love. You turned endings into beginnings." As the evening settled, she stepped outside one last time, the air full of crickets and the scent of earth. She looked up at the stars, bright and endless, and whispered, "Thank you for the gift of loving, for the strength to stay, for the grace to let go." And as she stood beneath that vast sky, she felt her heart open wide like the horizon itself, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel the space between heaven and earth. She felt only one thing: connection. The world had taken much from her, but it had also given her something greater: the understanding that love is the only thing that survives everything. She breathed slowly, deeply, her soul at rest, her eyes on the stars. She whispered, "I am home," and the night whispered back, "Welcome home."